Hello, this is Eileen, the environmental educator, and in this video, we're going to talk about a little sneaky thing that happened on the last day of the year, and the occupation was blasted for quietly changing the rule on water. This was January 1st, 2023, and so this is the Western Journal. This was, it was covered a lot of places. Here's Montana Public Radio, and they think that the EPA finalizes a water protection rule that repels Trump era changes, of course. So um, that's their spin on it. Now, it's according to the Western Journal, with the apparent goal of protecting American wetlands, the occupation has revised the legal definition of the term waters of the United States, or WOTUS, um, and that is bringing the ire of many congressional Republicans. Okay, and what are they going to do about it? They do nothing about anything. But they said that this move is coming while an important case regarding the EPA is being heard by the Supreme Court. But they say here that the EPA rule clarifies what bodies of water are subject to federal jurisdiction and what wetlands are excluded from federal regulation. But critics see it as a federal power grab that gives the EPA far too much discretion. And members of the Congressional Western Caucus said it's not just too much discretion, it's too much power. And they say that this rule is yet another bureaucratic attack on rural America. So the critics say that the Obama WOTUS rule drastically expanded the jurisdiction over bodies of water like lakes, streams, and ponds, leaving large swaths of Iowa land in the hands of the federal government, which they say and believe will have terrible consequences for our farmers, ranchers, and landowners in Iowa. The critics say it's another example of this occupation's determined adherence to the demands of environmentalists at the expense of hardworking Americans. Yet EPA Assistant Administrator explained that she thinks we have found middle ground that creates as much clarity as possible. And what is that clarity? Well, it would lessen the legal conflicts over what waterways are federally protected by the Clean Water Act, according to the EPA's reasoning. So, yeah, the EPA thinks that let's leave, if we really have an impartial court system in America, out of it to decide. We'll decide what we have regulation over. And, this, uh, do I know every detail of this? No. But anytime the government is claiming jurisdiction, it is another bureaucratic government agency that is now, encroaching more and more restrictions and regulations on the masses. And that's never turned out well. And that court case that's before the Supreme Court is from Michael and Chantel Sackett, and they attempted to build a home in the panhandle of Idaho, only to be stopped by the EPA, who said they were building on federally protected wetland. And I live out here in the West, kind of near the panhandle of Idaho, and there are a lot of people that bought property that in the western area, including in Montana, Idaho, and they thought that they were going to build their retirement home there, and they bought this land and they just sat on it, and when it came time for them to build, they just weren't allowed to. They couldn't get the permits, they couldn't get by the county, they just can't utilize their land. And this, I don't see how it's not another step towards that. And so the critics think that, the federal government doesn't need to regulate puddles, ditches, seasonal creeks, or culverts. And they say all this rule does is make it more difficult to grow food or build anything. And don't worry though, because the EPA has assured critics that it's not abusing its power. The new rule put in place on the last workday of the year may give them greater ability to regulate property, and the sneaky way this rule was implemented has raised red flags. And one thing, America maybe has in its corner is if the Supreme Court makes a decision in the Sackett matter that is in favor of the Sacketts, and it tells the EPA to back off. And we all know how federal agencies don't back off once they have their power, once they've made the bureaucrats have made their rules. But here's Montana National Public Radio, and they call it, a water protection rule that repeals, of course, that bad man Trump, who went in there and took out regulations. So they say that this has finalized regulations that protect hundreds of thousands of small streams, wetlands, and other waterways, repealing a Trump era rule that federal courts had thrown out that environmentalists said left waterways vulnerable to pollution. So, I'm certainly not for waterways being polluted, but our waterways are polluted. There's going to be a lot more that needs to happen to clean up our waterways than just the EPA, who hasn't done a good job of getting clean water. Okay, they've been on the job for decades, and our waterways are polluted. We don't need them now coming down on every right puddle and stream that goes across every just average American's property. But again, the federal officials say they wrote a durable definition of waterways to reduce uncertainty. Well, it's always, reducing uncertainty when the federal government comes in armed. I mean, the IRS is now getting armed. Every federal agency is. The EPA will be armed probably when they come to your house to discuss that puddle in your front yard and how you're not managing it. But the way the EPA thinks about it, they said they put forward a rule that's clear, it's durable, and it balances that protecting of our water resources with the needs of all water users, whether it's farmers, ranchers, industry, watershed organizations, according to an EPA assistant administrator. So, again, it's just a government agency getting bigger, stating, just we declare a proclamation. We now have authority over this. Don't worry, we're the good guys. And the Natural Resources Defense Council, they called repealing Trump's rule a smart move. Yeah, and it comes at a time when we're seeing unprecedented attacks on federal clean water protections by polluters and their allies. And if the NRDC had allowed the solutions the world needs since November '93, which they are still adamantly opposed to, our waterways would be a lot cleaner because we would have a gazillion less processes and polluting methods that not only pollute our streams and waterways, but our air and our soil and our bodies. So the NRDC always acting like the good guy, always failing to mention that they are the reason we still have problems, because the last thing they're interested in is solutions. And up into this case that's before them today, where they say the Sacketts need a permit to build on their own land because the wetlands were federally regulated. So far in the courts, in 2006, Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote that if wetlands significantly affect the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of nearby navigable waters like rivers, the Clean Waters Act protections apply. The EPA's rule includes this test, but four conservative judges, they say, in the 2006 case, said that if federal regulations only applied if there was a continuous surface connection between wetlands and an obviously regulated body of water like a river. So that's where the justices, the greatest minds of our times, are about this. Now, maybe we should just have common sense ruling things, and maybe we should just, the Supreme Court should step up and let the EPA know, just go away. The EPA has been in business since 70s, maybe 1970, and what have they achieved? The same thing as every other environmental voice out there: negative results. Okay, but they keep adding to it. Right, getting more power and more power, and we all know these government agencies, their power comes at the heavy hand of armed agents. And so Charles Yates, an attorney for the libertarian group, the Pacific Legal Foundation, said the new rule shows the importance of the Supreme Court case in the definition of WOTUS, and it shifts with each presidential administration. And Charles said, absent definitive guidance from the Supreme Court, a lawful, workable, and durable definition of navigable waters will remain elusive. So that's kind of where we're at. It says the Biden rule applies federal protection to wetlands, tributaries, and other waters that have significant connection to navigable waters, or if wetlands are relatively permanent. The rule sets no specific distance for when adjacent wetlands are protected, stating that several factors can determine if the wetland and the waterway can impact water quality and quantity on each other. It states that the impact depends on regional variations in climate, landscape, and geomorphology. So it's, to me, this just seems like another power grab. And, this occupation is just grabbing power all over. And that's what happens in, authoritative countries. The citizens just live under an authoritative government, and it just keeps happening more and more. And this, as far as I can see, is truly a step in that direction. Just more and more power, where if we just lived responsibly, we wouldn't really have to be worrying about all of these waterways, because we would be living responsibly and we wouldn't have the pollutants that we're worried about getting into them. Okay, so this is just you know, and the biggest thing about this is the way it was sneakily, it just, thrown in there, like, oh, on the last day of the year, we'll just throw it in, and Americans don't care anyway, so we'll just do one more power grab, and, there'll be another one, and another one, and another one, and then Americans will wonder how America collapsed. But to me, this is just another and a gazillion steps away from any bastion of freedom. It's this is not good. This is definitely not good, and it wouldn't be needed if anybody had allowed the environmental solutions the world needs since November of '93. So stay tuned, people.